So as promised, I wanted to do a video discussing CM Punk and Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, going to AEW. It's going to be starting very, very soon. Punk is scheduled to come in August 20th. That's the heavy rumor, which is going to be the AEW Rampage show from the Chicago United Center, his home turf. He fought in the UFC once in that same building. And in addition to that, we have Bryan debuting supposedly at Arthur Ashe Stadium up in New York in September. Now, there's a lot of other talk now about new guys coming in besides these two, like Adam Cole, Bray Wyatt, Bronson Reed, Bobby Fish. I could see these guys coming in at some point, but these are the two big names coming in. Now, why is this a big deal, and how big of a deal is it? Well, first of all, it's CM Punk. CM Punk has not wrestled since 2014, and there are still certain buildings and certain shows where fans chant CM Punk. Not as much as they did maybe the first couple of years that Punk was out, but for a while they did chant it a lot. And he's a guy who was a legitimate needle mover back in 2011 during the summer of Punk. He was a star. He was a guy who the fans connected with. He was a guy who, was in the main event picture, ever since he really elevated. You could even make an argument he was in the picture since '08 when he won the title, even though he wasn't really closing pay-per-views that much back then. And even his run in 2012, he didn't close that many pay-per-views. But still, he was one of the top guys in the mix. He's a guy who fans have wanted to see for a long time. Think about this, 2014 was a long time ago. Like, I felt like it was just yesterday, but it wasn't. That was 7 years ago. So the question is, Punk is in his 40s now. He's older. Is he, obviously he's not banged up anymore, but is he going to be in ring shape? Will he be ready? I'm sure he's already training to make this big comeback. And he's getting paid a lot of money. I heard from somebody who I talked to, the same guy who told me about Bryan signing, which I broke over on Twitter. If you're not following me on Twitter, it's at Emperor Big D. I do drop some wrestling scoops on there. And I was going to do a video on this channel, but I just couldn't find the time. The Dragon Ball news had come out. I had to focus heavily on that for my main channel. So I just couldn't really have time to really make that video and really get enough information. But over on my Twitter, at Emperor Big D, I do once in a while break wrestling news. And that story had, there had been rumors for a while, but I was told, no, Bryan signed. The Punk thing was after Bryan. But they were both rumored for a while. In fact, Tony Khan tried to sign CM Punk back in 2019 during StarCast and All Out weekend. But Punk said no, Punk was not ready. Now he is ready. So, like I said, 7 years is a long time. Will the fans remember him? I think a lot of them will. But I do think we have some new wrestling fans now who probably have no idea. But the thing about wrestling is that when somebody comes back, usually some fans will educate other fans, and it'll eventually be a thing where they all kind of figure it out. You know what I mean? So that will be okay. Now, as far as Punk's impact on the business, I do think Punk will legitimately move the needle. I could be wrong on this one. By the way, if you don't know what that means, move the needle means he's actually going to have an impact on business. I think he'll have merchandise that will sell for AEW. I think he will bring in pay-per-view buys. I think he will bring back lapsed CM Punk fans who have been wanting to see him come back. I think he will absolutely pop the ratings as well. How long will that last? Difficult to say. Will he be booked well? I don't know. AEW's booking is flawed. It's very flawed sometimes. Recently, they've gotten better, though. The way they got Malachi Black over on the last episode of Dynamite was very, very smart. But it's one of those things where, Punk, they got to protect him. And obviously, he's a guy who speaks his mind. He's a guy who has ideas. He's a guy who is a creative guy. CM Punk is a creative guy. So I think with the creative freedom that AEW gives you and Tony Khan understanding how much of a star he is, I think that he'll be fine as far as his own booking. You know what I mean? Now, will that affect other talents? I mean, there's always jealousy and things like that that go on. Hopefully not, but this happens in the real world all the time. But I do think that CM Punk will have a positive impact on AEW's business as far as getting more eyeballs in the product, because now they can promote, hey, guys, we got CM Punk. They can buy ad space on WWE websites, wrestling websites, on WWE programming saying, hey, remember CM Punk? He's an all elite now. And that's a big deal for a lot of fans. So that's huge. Bryan Danielson is the better of the two wrestlers. Punk is a better promo than Danielson, but Daniel Bryan, I mean, I've been a fan of this guy since 2002 when he was in Ring of Honor. Like, and some people have known him even before that when he was wrestling on the independent circuit, in King of the Indies and all these other huge tournaments and shows. I've been following this guy's career all throughout Ring of Honor, all throughout WWE when he retired because of the injuries he had when he came back. I was in the building. I was at WrestleMania 30 when he won the championship in 2014, and I was at WrestleMania 34 when he came back to team up with Shane McMahon against Zayn and Owens. And I love this guy. I mean, I met him a couple times. You know, he's a genuine dude. He wants to work New Japan at least once or twice. So he signed a deal with AEW, which will allow him to work New Japan once these restrictions have gone down with the pandemic. This is a big deal, and I'm going to tell you why. Number one, he is a naturally likable guy. So he'll probably be a babyface for at least his initial part of his run. That's number one. Number two, he's very popular. The yes chant was a big deal when it happened. A huge deal. And I think that will really help, not the yes chant, but having him in AEW, again, like CM Punk, will add credibility to the brand. Because CM Punk was a legit headliner. He main evented pay-per-views against The Rock, The Undertaker, Jericho, and Cena. You know, he's had main event matches. Bryan is the same way. He's worked Cena. He's worked all the top guys, Roman Reigns, everybody. And he's a guy who they literally had to put in the title picture for WrestleMania because they wanted him to save that show because Edge was not getting the reaction they were hoping for because they kind of botched it with Edge. So this dude just came off main eventing WrestleMania and putting together an amazing three-way match for Roman Reigns and Edge. So having him come into the company not just as a worker, not just as a draw, but as a teacher for young talents like your Sammy Guevara's, like your Jungle Boys. This is a huge positive for the wrestling business, or for the AEW business, that is. Like having Bryan come in and Punk come in, I think is a very big positive. And also they're going to be working on limited schedules. And because of that, it's one of those things where it's going to be beneficial for both of them because Punk doesn't want to travel like everywhere. I mean, this is one of the early guys who bought a tour bus. Remember that. So Punk is going to enjoy the lighter schedule, and Bryan has a family. He wants to be like a husband at home to his daughter, Brie Bella's kid, and so his kid, and so he wants that freedom to be able to be a father. And AEW, because they don't run house shows, they don't have a crazy schedule, they could provide that freedom for him. Even though I do think they're going to start running more house shows and more live events, 2022, next year. They're going to run way more live events, and we'll see Punk and Bryan at some of those shows. They're going to mostly work the TV and the pay-per-views. So it's good for these guys who are not as young as they used to be. I mean, they're both in their 40s. That's not old for wrestling, even though Vince McMahon thinks it is, but that's also not young. They're not like 20 years old where they can do whatever, and so it's good for them as family men. Well, Punk has a wife but not any kids, but you get what I'm saying. Like, they like that freedom. But I think they will have a tremendous impact on AEW. People who don't know much about wrestling, no offense, are comparing this to like Hall and Nash going to WCW in '96. Absolutely not. It's probably the biggest jump we've gotten in this era. Like in this generation, outside of Jericho, I think this is bigger than Jon Moxley. I think it's bigger than The Big Show and Mark Henry for sure. I think it's bigger than Aleister Black and Andrade. These are two legitimate stars that connect with that audience and that connected with fans in WWE, right? Aleister Black, I love him, but as a wrestler, but he didn't really connect the way Bryan and Punk did. So, it's huge. And, no, it's not anywhere near being as big as Hall and Nash. Like, you have to study the history of the business to understand where the business was at back in the 90s. And the NWO worked because of Hall and Nash and Hulk Hogan. And they don't have anybody on the level of Hulk Hogan. Like, nobody in wrestling right now is on the level of Hulk Hogan and may never be. because the business has changed so much, and Hulk Hogan's a one of a kind guy. You know what I mean? Guys like The Rock, Steve Austin, they're retired. Rock might come back for a couple more matches, but it's just not going to be the same. These guys are not on that level. Like some fans are trying to say they are, they're not. But could it help AEW at least improve their visibility and improve ticket sales? Absolutely, I think it will. I think it's unquestionable that it will. I think that it'll improve pay-per-view buy rates. I think this is a very big move by Tony Khan and a smart move and one that any promoter who understands the business would take. That's the way I see it. So anyways, what do you think about Punk and Bryan jumping over to AEW? What matches? I might do a separate video about what matches I want to see. Obviously, Kenny Omega and Hangman Page are two guys who can be in the mix with them at any point. Darby Allin and Punk are set to feud. Bryan is set to wrestle probably Kenny Omega, I'm guessing. It's going to be a good match. Bryan against Tanahashi. I mean, there's so much potential for the Japanese talent. Bryan versus Okada. Oh my God, dude. Bryan versus Will Ospreay if he goes to Japan. He will. But just AEW roster, Bryan against Malachi Black in a good solid match. Bryan, there's just so many matches, bro. Like there's a lot of talent there. Bryan and Jericho again. Punk and Jericho again. Why not? Bryan and Jon Moxley again. There's a lot of guys there they could mix in. Hell, the Young Bucks against Bryan and Punk could be a good match. I mean, just think there's a lot of matches, but a lot of stuff that they could take their time building. Anyways, that's going to do it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.